Great. Hello, everyone watching live, and also for those of you who will be watching the recording, all things detox today, and a warm welcome from Durban. It's slightly cooler, and so happy to be having this conversation with Natasha again, and looking forward to sharing wonderful insights and some technical knowledge and information for this next hour. So Natasha, I'll just give you a chance to introduce yourself, and then we can go from there.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our Detox 101 session. My name is Natasha. I am a qualified homeopath, but I work for a company called AmiPro, and we distribute the Metagenics nutraceutical range. More so, we are firmly embedded in education excellence. We bring education in functional medicine and functional nutrition to South Africa and to our practitioners. That's how I met Em, and that's where our relationship started. And we have a shared passion for delivering information that can change lives and empower. So I hope you find this a useful session this morning. I know certainly I needed to brush up on my detox, so I'm hoping it will do the same for you.
I'm sure it will. Yeah, so for those of you who know me, and for those of you who haven't met me before, I'm a practitioner, a qualified dietitian. I use nutritional therapy and functional medicine in my practice and in my approach. And over the last few decades, I've become really passionate about understanding the root cause of disease, and in assisting my clients to get to the root cause of what was driving their diagnosis or their chronic disease. Detoxification, of course, has been over the years somewhat of a controversial subject. I know many medical practitioners, and even in the media, we will see information that detoxification is a complete waste of time. Our body knows exactly what to do, but I hope that today we can let you know and give you some information to help you understand more about the priorities, how we become exposed to toxins, and why the body sometimes struggles to detoxify appropriately.
Well, I think having said that, probably a good place to start is starting with the definition of detox, because I think so many people have their own preconceived ideas about what a detox is. And I'm sure you've come across many patients with their own versions of detox. But what in your mind, how would you describe detox before I attempt my definition?
Yeah, so I mean, there are incredibly scientific ways of describing detox. I've usually try to interpret or explain detoxification in the context of toxic burden. Toxic burden being when the body becomes overwhelmed by its exposure to toxins from its immediate environment or from medications that people take. And then that causing the body to become sluggish, the different cleaning organs, not just the liver, the kidneys, the lymph, the gut, for example. So detoxification implying then that we are assisting the body in adapting to the process of getting rid of toxins that might become harmful in the short or in the long term. And that might involve supporting the liver, supporting the kidneys, supporting the gut, or supporting the lymphatic system. We know that certain molecules are quite harmful to the brain, for example, and that it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So the body tries to, in its very sophisticated but simple way, do a simple detoxification where it keeps products or molecules or substances from affecting the brain, for example, but it's not always that simple. Sometimes it will need a bit of help.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's it. It's a toxic burden, and people need to understand that, yes, our bodies do detoxify naturally every day. And really what we're saying about the process of detoxification or supporting patients with detoxification is supporting that natural process. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to force a process that's unnatural to the body. We're merely trying to optimize the processes that already are taking place. And simply put, for me, detox, like you've said, is normalizing the daily metabolism that already happens, as well as excretion of waste. Because some of us are very good at metabolizing waste, but if you're constipated, for instance, you're not going to be excreting that waste sufficiently. So my big thing I always say is, well, I always ask is, are you constipated? Because if a person tells me that they're constipated, and by constipated, I mean that you don't have 2 bowel movements a day, then we pretty much understand that there's an issue with excretion. But a metabolically assisted detox, which is what our practitioners do, is basically a detoxification that supports all 3 phases of detox, which maybe we can share with everybody today, so they have a little bit of a deeper understanding into what this big word detox actually means. And more importantly, understanding that it happens every day and that we can do things every day to support it, or we can see a practitioner that will take us through the deeper detox for a shorter period of time, just to clean out, and thereafter we can do gentle things every day. But I thought maybe a good place to start is to just go through the phases of detox. What do you think, Em? Do you think I can just briefly let our listeners know? So in terms of detoxification, one of the things that's really important is that if you do a detox, you shouldn't be feeling unwell. We don't really want to precipitate a healing crisis during a detox. In fact, if you start to do a detox and you begin to feel unwell, the general rule is to tap back slightly. You might have to spend more time in a space where you're including good foods rather than just eliminating, or you might need more rest, or you might need to look at the medication that you're on. But the main thing with detoxification is we never really want our patients to feel worse, and we don't want to precipitate this healing crisis. What that means with the patient who's experiencing it is typically that the 3 phases are imbalanced. We might be metabolizing quicker than we're excreting, or even in the metabolism side of things, there is an imbalance. And this is what I want to quickly just describe. So if this is our slide, this is what you can, let me get my pointer, that might be easier. So this is inside the liver. And inside the liver, we have 2 phases of detoxification. We have liver function phase 1, and we have liver function phase 2. So already we know that the liver is a very important organ when it comes to detoxification, and most people will understand that, and they'll always come and ask us, well, can I get something for my liver for detoxification? But it's not as simple as just taking milk thistle, unfortunately, and this is why. Because in phase 1 liver detoxification, what actually happens is the parent toxin, this green thing, comes along, and the liver will then process that toxin. And at the end of phase 1 processing, we actually have something called a reactive intermediate. So reactive intermediate is basically broken up bits of the parent toxin, but it is more toxic and more dangerous to the body often than the original parent toxin was. So at the end of phase 1 liver detoxification, we actually have a situation where the liver is now sitting with all these metabolites that are actually more dangerous and more toxic. So during the process of liver detoxification, we actually make the toxins more toxic. And that's where a lot of the liver damage can happen. If you can imagine people who consume alcohol, and they begin to get cirrhosis of the livers. The first they get the inflammation, then they get the hardening. And it's happening at the end of phase 1 as we're creating all these intermediates. And over time, the liver itself becomes damaged, it becomes inflamed, and then you can get the formation of scar tissue in the liver, and that is then what affects the liver's functioning. So this reactive intermediate needs to be dealt with, and it needs to be dealt with very swiftly. So what happens is the reactive intermediate becomes neutralized in phase 2 liver functionality. Now, why am I saying this? Because most people, and I know this over the years from working in the health food industry and working in practice, is that most patients will think of a product for liver detox. So they'll come up to you and say, I need something for detoxification. And everybody knows milk thistle. And they'll say, please, can I have some milk thistle for liver detoxification? Well, it's not that simple, because your phase 1 and your phase 2 in your liver require different essential nutrients in order to perform their functions. And it's much, much bigger and complicated than simply putting milk thistle. So milk thistle, for instance, is a herb that's going to at least protect your liver. So it's going to reduce the amount of damage that the liver actually is exposed to as a result of the buildup of reactive intermediates. But beyond that, the liver still needs to be supported in its actual functionality in phase 1 and phase 2. And I will show you a slide a little bit later. But what we see now is after you've neutralized that toxin then goes to the kidney. So the kidney can only deal with things that are water soluble and that are packaged by the liver. So at the end of phase 2, which is our conjugation phase, conjugation simply means to add on, where we've added things onto these reactive intermediates, we actually make them water soluble and they can go to the kidney. So you have to understand then that in the detoxification process, we have to think about the kidney and we have to support the kidney. And actual fact, I don't know if it's the same for you, but very often in practice, we have to reverse the process of detoxification and start with supporting the kidney first, because you don't want to send things to a kidney that might already be compromised. And there's various tests we can do to discern kidney functioning. But one of the things that is easy for most people to do at home is to do a urine dipstick, where they measure the pH of the urine. And a pH of 6.6 and below will tell you that there's a little bit of acidity in the body, that the kidney is going to struggle with excretion, and that you need to work on making the body a little bit more alkaline. And we use potassium-rich foods generally to do that, unless we are heart patients or we get end-stage renal failure. Potassium is a really easy way to alkalinize the body, or potassium-rich foods, your green leafy veg. Because once we get that pH in the urine up a bit, then the kidney is able to help us get rid of waste a little bit easier. And sometimes we need to go as far as actually supporting the kidney with things like taurine, for instance, an amino acid that is amazing at supporting kidney filtration. It's also amazing at dropping blood pressure. Or we have other formulas that work really well on supporting kidney filtration rate and supporting the actual function of the kidney. But this is just to show your listeners that detox is not localized just to one herb. It's not localized just to the liver. A very big part of our excretion side of detox involves the kidney. And it's something that we really need to consider. So imbalanced detoxification, when people have a healing crisis, or if just on their own they're beginning to experience symptoms, which you can maybe talk to Em, what's actually happening is this toxin that has come in has gone through the phase 1. There's a special group of enzymes called your CYP450 enzymes. They break that parent toxin down into a reactive intermediate, and it's this reactive intermediate that can cause damage to our DNA, our RNA, our proteins. A very big example of this would be in women. When the parent's estrogen enters into the liver, there are actually 3 pathways along which we can chop up that estrogen, and 2 of them are very dangerous for us in terms of breast cancer, endometrial cancer, and they are basically reactive intermediates of estrogens. And if we don't conjugate them in phase 2 very quickly, then those reactive intermediates can in fact leave the liver. So that the damage is not isolated to the liver. It can then move anywhere in the body, because it can get into the bloodstream and cause problems, one of them being breast cancer, for instance. So the conjugation phase, which to conjugate means to add on, where we add different things onto these intermediates, is essential to help us then make them water soluble so they can become excreted. So when patients do come to us as practitioners. All we're really trying to do is balance the phase 1 and the phase 2, and maybe even the phase 3 in the kidney and in the gut. And it's a lot more complicated, like I said, than taking milk thistle. And this is why, because in the phase 1, these are all the things that we need at the very least to perform phase 1 detoxification. Your B vitamins play a huge role in detox. It's not something that comes to mind when we're thinking detox, but our B vitamins are a very, very big part of that. The other thing is our phospholipids, our flavonoids. So these are all the things we get from foods that we're eating, as well as amino acids. Amino acids are extremely important. And then if we look at phase 2, our amino acids, again, our protein features very heavily. And so, and many women especially are actually protein deficient. And if we are protein deficient, we can't detoxify. So the conjugation side of things, where we add things onto toxins, is heavily dependent on amino acids. In fact, we use a lot of these proteins to conjugate the waste. So if you can think of your protein basically as a source of packaging for your body, not just for your muscle to make muscle, but packaging for waste that we use in the phase 2 and we then excrete. So our taurine is mentioned there again, but things like glutathione, things like N-acetylcysteine, things like methionine, our glutamine, you know, a good whey powder is maybe a nice thing to take to support phase 2, but otherwise targeted amino acids to support phase 2 is also something that we should consider.
Yeah, so it's so, you know, it's so interesting if we think of the detoxification process and then how the nutrients are involved in so many of these enzymatic processes. So it's not as if we think of the liver as this organ that knows exactly what to do. Each of these phases will require certain nutrients to be available in optimal quantities. So I think it also reminds one that if you don't have adequate nutrients, if you eat a diet that is poor source, you know, full of processed foods, for example, lots of sugar, perhaps taking a whole lot of medications, a lot of coffee, then there's not enough of the building blocks of these liver enzymes for it to work optimally. And I think where people often also become quite curious about the symptoms of, so how do I know if I need to go on a detox? Because it's not always as clear as a raised liver enzyme, for example, in a blood test. And it's good to know that it can be quite vague sometimes. Things like flu-like symptoms. People have sort of flu-like symptoms that hang around for a long time, or muscle pain, or maybe brain fog, dark circles under their eyes, or rash, or hives, or cold hands or feet, or excess perspiration. So it's not something just specific that will indicate that you need to do a detoxification. I quite like to use a detox questionnaire in which you can look at your score to then show whether a detox is indicated or not. But it's important to know that it's you know, your fatigue or your brain fog, which seems to almost indicate something different, can be related to a toxic burden that your body is struggling to deal with.
And Emma, I want to add to that, because so often patients used to land up at my rooms because they're not feeling well, they are symptomatic, but lab-wise, there's nothing wrong with them. And so often their physician will tell them, but there's nothing wrong with you. And rightly so, because, I mean, if the labs don't say there's a problem and the physician can't diagnose a disease, there's really not much he can do, because his medicines are based on the diagnoses he makes. And I find it's often those patients that land up at like a homeopath, for instance, or land up at a homeopath's doorstep because they feel unwell, they don't feel right, but there's not much else that can be done. It can't be labeled. And often those vague symptoms, when lab-wise you look okay, but you know that you have to live in your body, and you know that you're not the way that you should be, often that is associated with a need for a metabolically assisted detox. And the questionnaire, I've just put it on. I think this is the one that you use too, Emma, I'm not sure. But it's a very simple tool that is available, and it can very quickly give patients an idea of where they stand. But I'll tell you, even for myself, when I did this, and I regard myself as someone that lives a healthy life, I am mindful of the foods I eat, and I'm mindful of all the factors that are required to stay in balance. But when I completed this detox questionnaire for the first time, I scored well over 50. And it just brought home the message to me that even if you don't have symptoms, it is good to do a detox, because we are basically surrounded by toxins in the environment. In fact, I don't know if you're aware of that study where they looked at the umbilical cord, the cord blood. I think it was well over 200 infants. So these are children that obviously they've just been born, the cord's just been cut, the blood gets drawn and gets sent away, and they measure huge amounts, over 200 different chemicals and pesticides and toxins just in cord blood alone. So by the time that the child is born, they're already toxic. And I think it is because everywhere we go in our environment, you know, since the Industrial Revolution, all those chemicals are in the air, they're in the water, they're in the soil. We really can't get away from it. So my takeaway was that if you live on Earth, you probably do need to assist your body with a detox every now and again, even if you don't feel the symptoms. A detox that's well balanced is not ever going to harm you. It's just going to make you feel better. But understand that we live on a toxic planet, because patients do, they ask you, so how many times should I do a detox? Do I even need a detox? I don't feel toxic. And I explain to them, well, if you're on this planet, it's probably a good thing to do. And then I let them do the detox questionnaire, and most of them score well above 50. And I tell them, if you take any medication, sometimes medication is needed, but medications are mitochondrial disruptors. And so it doesn't matter what medication it is, you need to potentially detox. But in the situation where you're on polypharmacy or you're taking a lot of medication, I would never ever advise you to do a detox on your own. You'd need to go to a skilled practitioner who can take into consideration the meds that you're on, because some medications are actually turned on or switched on by phase 1 liver detox. So those things would then be kept in mind by the practitioner doing the guided detox. But Emma, I wanted to actually just add to what you were saying earlier with this slide. So these are the main pathways in the body. There's the different ways we can detox toxins, right? Methylation, acetylation, glycination, glucuronidation, sulfation, glutathione. But that's not really what I wanted to just quickly illustrate. I just wanted to...
I'm just mindful of maybe a waiting room, and because I'm not the host, I can't see if there's anybody. I just was wondering if there's anyone in the waiting room, because there are a few people who indicated that they would like to join.
Yes, I'm not seeing anybody in the waiting room.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So I just wanted to quickly mention some of the common things that we are exposed to. Things like penicillin, which is an antibiotic. Okay, how many of us have taken antibiotics, and how many of our patients are on antibiotics? And if you especially think children who are already born with this toxic burden, and quite often in the first 2 to 3 years when they got the otitis and all those things, they are placed on antibiotics. Things like paracetamol, you know, we use that for fever, we use that for pain every day. So non-steroidal anti-inflammatories are another one. So I just want to stress the fact that, you know, toxicity has nothing necessarily to do with the type of toxin. It's the fact that it's the everyday stuff that we're exposed to that eventually can accumulate and eventually can cause problems. And the more you engage with these everyday things, the higher the risk is that there could be a toxic burden, or that there could be consequences. So it doesn't have to be a situation where you even have symptoms. If you are using these things on a regular basis, it might be a good idea to just, consider a detox at least twice a year.
Yeah, and I remember at one of our lectures, and I can't remember which one, in functional medicine, that it was mentioned that for children, even a detox support from a young age, especially if the environment. So if you're living in an area where there's a lot of air pollution, or perhaps the soil pollution, or heavy metal exposure, or if the mother has perhaps had a toxic burden for a long time, and in utero there's exposures. So it's not like we have to wait until something goes wrong. I think even mentioning children and infants, that possibly for some of them a detox support can be helpful. But it's also how we look at perhaps limiting our exposure, because it's not just about doing a detox. It's also about, okay, in future or going forward, can I reduce my toxin exposure? And one of my favorite comments, or one of the things that I really try to stress when it comes to toxin exposure, is our daily household detergents for women, their beauty products, for example. So yes, we can help the liver, we can help the kidneys, but ultimately over time we want to also consider our exposure. So household cleaners, if you walk in your supermarket, that aisle where the detergents are, you can smell all the chemicals and the fragrances. Heavy metals, and many adults have got metal fillings in their teeth. Air pollution, for example, or if you're living in an area where there's a lot of factories, for example, or next to a very busy road where there's a lot of fumes. I'm thinking also of people who grow up perhaps on farms where there's regular spray of crops with insecticides or pesticides. And then, your daily soap and shampoo and toothpaste. So looking at toxin exposure and how you can perhaps reduce that.
And our skin is the biggest organ in our body, and it eats whatever we put on it. It's so true. I mean, even in our home, I'm very particular about what goes on my children's skin, what goes in their bath. It does mean that they don't have the fun bubble baths, but we try as much as possible to not disrupt the skin barrier and not feed it something that I wouldn't feed them orally. So it's a big part. And I think even with cosmetics, just looking at the ingredients and things like petroleum, which are pretty much used in most creams, if you see that word, just put it back down, because it's not going to do you any favors, especially if you're a woman. But most of the exposure though comes from the foods we eat. So 90%, in fact, of the foods we eat, of our toxin exposure, comes from things like PCPs and dioxins. These are what we call persistent pesticides. So they stay in the environment for very long. They are biodegradable over the long run, but they hang around for a very long time. And so much so that they were completely banned in the United States, and I think Sweden, I'm speaking under correction. So and they come from they used to be placed in the environment from things like incinerating waste. So just being mindful of how you deal with your own waste at home and how you recycle can all lead to a healthier planet. So I think this notion of keeping our planet clean, keeping our planet healthy, detoxifying the planet, as it were, will essentially then help us to detoxify. But, supermarket food, especially 35% of all foods we purchase in supermarkets have a measurable amount of pesticide residues, even in organic foods. Because of cross-contamination, you really can't get away with it. So supporting local farmers, buying organic where you can. But, sometimes we can't afford organic. So we have to make a plan, washing our veggies really well, and things like that, to just try and make a big difference. But I've got a really nice diagram I'd like to show. So in functional medicine, we have what we term the dirty dozen. And so the dirty dozen: celery, peaches, strawberries, apples, blueberries, nectarines, bell peppers, spinach, cherries, kale, interestingly enough, potatoes and grapes. So these are foods that ideally we should be buying organic. They're not always available as organic though, so I'm not sure how
I've sometimes seen yeah, the dirty dozen also I think changes each year, or it's sort of or you can always just have a look for 2022 dirty dozen, and then there's the clean 16.
Yes.
I think generally
Yes.
the types of fruit and vegetables, and so the things that require less chemical sprays in order for the crop to do well.
Yeah, so there's a clean, well, I've got the clean 15, so I'm hoping they add into that list. But yeah, so it's just for people to maybe be aware that there are foods that are more prone to contamination than others. For instance, fish is another one. Hey, so while we want our patients to eat fish, because it's been proven now that fish and fish oil especially has huge benefits for cardiovascular health and mortality. But at the same time, our fish are swimming in polluted oceans, and it really doesn't matter where the fish is harvested from. So one of the things I'd like to touch on here is very often when we're trying to introduce fish or even fish oil related products, patients might bring us what they're on. And a lot of marketing is spent on saying that it's fish that is caught at deep water levels, or it's in a certain part of the ocean that it's harvested. And really, the point is the ocean is one body and it's connected. And there's no ways that we can really be sure that a fish harvested at this side of the ocean is going to be better than another one. And that the fish oil that we then get from that is going to be different. So even with our fish, people need to understand if you're taking anything out the ocean, it's likely going to be contaminated, especially with things like methyl mercury. And that if you are going to be eating fish per se, is to mix your fish up. It's not eating the same type of fish and going for the smaller fish like sardine. So it's more affordable anyway. But sardines, for instance, will give you high amounts of EPA, DHA, all those nice things you need, a lot of protein to help you with detoxification, and they'll be lower on the end of methyl mercury. But certainly, even with the fish we consume, there are more cleaner fish, fish that are smaller and not on they're not at the top of the food chain. And the same thing with our veggies, just to be aware of it. I think it's such an important thing. And the other thing, Emma, I also just wanted to share was animal products. So, in functional medicine, we're not against meat per se and animal products per se, but what we do suggest that if people want to be mindful of their exposure, is to go with grass-fed, organically reared if possible. We know it's not always feasible financially for folks, but that's the recommendation we make, because about 25 million pounds of antibiotics are added to livestock feed every year. And it's not just antibiotics, it's also things, hormones to promote fattening and bulking up of the animals. And all of that reaches our guts, essentially. So to try and look for dairy or for meat-based products that are not using routine hormone supplementation or antibiotic use, it's another thing that people should be mindful of. And definitely, as we've seen, we need protein to detoxify. So getting your protein from a good, clean source. And it's just sad that we don't always find clean sources in our supermarkets, or the labeling doesn't really tell you whether it's hormone free or grass-fed or whatever the case might be. So maybe finding a supplier. There are a lot of these apps that people can download, and they can get meat directly from local farmers, sort of thing. But the hormone disruption is a big thing. So sometimes if your hormones are out of kilter as a woman, it could be that you actually just need to detox.
Yeah, and when it comes to things like chicken and red meat and fish, I think consumers have to be so aware and really become knowledgeable. You want to be very discerning about what you choose to put in your body. Just like when you have toddlers and you put a lock on your kitchen cupboard or your detergent cupboard because you don't want your children to get to that and perhaps ingest that. We've got to have the same mindset about what we choose to eat. And more now, more than definitely 10 and 20 years ago, we see local sort of farmers markets or farmers advertising that they do a monthly delivery. So it's not that hard to find outlets or farmers or stores where these fruits and vegetables are available. So I think as consumers, it's a lot more accessible compared to a few years ago.
Em, can you hear me still?
I can.
Sorry, my camera is just switched off for some reason. I have no idea why, but as long as you can hear me and you can see the presentation, that's all good. No, I agree. I think it starts with mindfulness, and it can be overwhelming for patients because often they're not aware of these things and they haven't given it two thoughts. But I usually say to people, and this is, I get it from Dr. Vasquez, who's one of my favorite teachers, if you can't grow it on a tree or in the soil, pretty much you probably shouldn't be having it. So if you can't grow your food, it's likely to be processed. Just things like cereals that many kids are fed every morning. Most of those cereals come from crops that are very heavily sprayed or they're genetically modified. And so as practitioners, what we really try and do is get our patients to read labels in the supermarket. And it actually becomes quite difficult to walk out with a full trolley because once you start reading labels, it becomes very difficult for you to actually purchase the product. But the point is that we are bombarded every day by the decisions we make and also the limitations we have because we don't have transparent labeling and we don't have, our supermarkets simply just don't provide enough of a range that's affordable for everybody. So, and not everybody can afford, the organic vegetables, but certainly washing our veggies and maybe limiting our exposure to red meat then if we can't buy grass-fed meat, for instance, but then making sure that we take away protein powder that comes from a grass-fed source just to make up for the amino acids that are lost. I think is a very practical way to go about it. But Em, so we're talking now about sort of the things that happen on the outside. I don't know if we've got time, but I would like to talk about probably one of the biggest causes of toxicity inside our body. So I'd like to show you this slide. The condition is called endotoxemia. And basically what it is, it's when our patients have leaky gut syndrome or when the gut is compromised, we actually get the exposure of non-digestible foods and also bacteria that are naturally found in our foods. We get exposed to that in the immune system. So what normally happens is, let me get my little laser pointer just so I can describe this for people who are not aware of this phenomenon. So endotoxemia is also incidentally one of the biggest causes of insulin resistance and issues with sugar. So my pointer is not working now, but anyway, so we've got our enterocyte lining. So this is basically these yellow cells with the purple dots inside them are the cells that line our gut. And just above them, we have a nice mucous membrane, blue mucus coating, which is very important. And then what you will see is there are these green tight junctions, these green proteins that basically extend into those enterocytes. And what they do is they basically help to cause an impermeable barrier. But what happens with so many patients is that that tight junction gets damaged. One of the biggest disruptors of this tight junction, Em, is gluten. So it becomes damaged, and then you get the sort of gaps appearing in the lining. So that's called increased gut permeability or leaky gut. And so food and bacteria that normally wouldn't interfere with the immune system, so these are cells of the immune system that lie just below that layer, food now gets through and starts to react with those cells, and you basically have what's called a immune reaction to the food that you're eating. And now obviously if the food is very high in bacteria, and we know that takeout food, for instance, fast food, processed food that just heat in the microwave, is typically very high in these in bacteria. And so it's even worse if you consume a diet like that and you've got leaky gut. These things get through and they promote an immune reaction, and it actually can cause insulin resistance. And this is a toxic state that originates from inside the body, from inside the gut. And endotoxemia is probably the reason why many people struggle to lose weight. It's also the reason why many people have insulin resistance or sugar issues, even if they're not necessarily eating a lot of sugar per se. And it's probably also the reason why people start reacting to foods. So we've all had those patients where they literally come to us and say, I can't eat anything, I react to everything. So when you start noticing that you're reacting to foods and you're not feeling well after eating, it could be that there's a bit of endotoxemia. And so part of the detox process involves addressing this and fixing the gut. And very often, like I said earlier, we have to reverse the detox process. We have to start maybe with the kidney first and work our way up to the liver. Many times we also have to start in the gut. So you have to fix the gut first, because you're not really going to want to do a detox when this is going on. You're going to want to fix this.
Yep.
And that's why it's a bit of a process. And that's why it's called a metabolic assisted detox, because we are supporting a lot of these metabolic processes, and we're also supporting the structures responsible for them in order to ensure that our patients don't get a healing crisis.
Yeah, and for me, if I think of somebody who's unwell and who's been unwell for some time, it's almost inevitable that there will be a compromised gut lining. I think one should even just assume that that's present anyway, even if they can't, even if they're not eating gluten, and even if they haven't recently been on an antibiotic, just from all the disruption over time, and perhaps a few courses of cortisone, or just a very unhealthy lifestyle previously, and from lots of stress, this could happen regardless of your recent diet.
And I think stress is a huge component. We can actually stress ourselves into a toxic state. And again, people need to understand that sometimes a detox is required to just get back that balance. So the point is that detoxification and going into a situation with a practitioner where you're going to be doing a guided detox and you're going to be taught how to then maintain that state is essential, because there's so many pathways by which we can become toxic. And then, as I said, you land up in a situation where perhaps there's multiple things wrong with you, but your labs don't really reflect that. So I would say don't wait for your laboratory results to show that your liver enzymes are raised. By the time you have raised liver enzymes, or by the time you have raised inflammatory markers in the gut, for instance, it probably means that the toxic process is a well-established one, and it will take time. So I don't know, how often would you recommend people detox though? Because that is a question that I get asked all the time. And so what is it that we do? Do we just do like 2 detoxes a year, or do you actually get your patients to do gentle detoxification on a daily basis?
So I was about to say, like what are we going to tell people what to do? I think for somebody who has chronic exposure and who's had exposure to all kinds of toxins, the ones that we've mentioned, even if you don't feel up for a big metabolic detox process, where you're cutting out certain things for a month or longer, I think gentle support in the form of a product, and you can tell us about the Metagenics options that are available. But I think for somebody where we know that there's been a lot of exposure and there's a lot of stuff going on, to at the very least do gentle support ongoing. I know for me that made a big difference. But there are many people, and I think most of my clients that I see, who would really benefit from at least 2 dedicated detoxification processes, or what shall we call it, detoxes a year. And you can choose, some people want to say, I want to do it at the beginning of the year because that's been after Christmas and New Year, and then again mid-year, so you can do it like that, or you can maybe do it in March and September. So it just really depends on the client and how urgent it is for them to shift. For somebody who is quite unwell and we really need to just shift things, I would do a more intensive process. I've got a client at the moment who's doing 7 to 10 days of a medical food, a Metagenics medical food, and hardly eating, because we know that this will make all that energy that the body usually uses to digest food available, so that we can create a shift in their condition. But that is not for everyone. It's not either or, but I think each individual will have a different indication for how big and
Yes.
how often. What do you think, Natasha?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And I think the most important thing is that patients maintain away from the detox. So it's not a question, so that we run the risk, if we just do twice a year, that patients fall off the wagon. I'm just using myself as an example, even though I'm so mindful of what I do, and I try to make the right decisions most days. There are periods in your life where, it's just, you're so busy just keeping your head above water with all the responsibilities and the hats you have to wear, especially as a mum. And it's so easy to just let go of that mindfulness when it comes to keeping your body healthy and to choosing foods that are toxin free. Sometimes all it's about just getting the kids fed and getting them to bed. But for myself, I think the big thing is maintaining what you've done in a metabolically assisted detox. And maybe one of them, I don't know if you agree, would be intermittent fasting, is making sure that once we've done a guided detox, to maybe incorporate that intermittent fasting, just to help our body to reach that stage of autophagy where we can regenerate and we can also feel much better. I think a lot of symptoms disappear when we introduce intermittent fasting, just to give the body a break. But I would say, and I would like to just share on one product here, on our Advocare, if it will let me share. So, this for me is the detox in a bottle. It's my when in doubt go-to. It's the kind of product that most people can have quite safely, and it's not going to cause too many healing crises. So if there are patients out there that are not open to a guided detox, they want something that will support them gently every day, optimizing both phase 1, both phase 2, and phase 3 liver in the kidneys. Advocare is my go-to. I know it's a product that you love and you work with quite a lot. It does contain the milk thistle, or the silymarin as we refer to it. So it's definitely going to be protecting the liver. But my favorite ingredient in this product is the ingredient called ellagic acid. Ellagic acid is something we get from pomegranate. So it's nice to include that in your diet. But why I like ellagic acid is that if for whatever reason you are deficient in protein, so let's think of maybe an older person who's got protein malabsorption, a person that's convalescing after illness, been bedridden for a long time, or there's just issues with getting a good protein supply, you're going to struggle with the conjugation reaction in phase 2. You're not going to be able to bind to toxins and neutralize them. So ellagic acid can perform that function for you. So I'm thinking especially if we have our vegans and our vegetarians, for instance, where we find that protein intake often doesn't meet their needs. A very quick way for them to provide that conjugation support is to take something like Advocare, because the ellagic acid seeks out toxins, binds to them, neutralizes them, and helps us to excrete them in the kidney. So it's really a very, very nice formula to work with. And I think that's one of the reasons why this won't make you feel ill, because we're protecting the liver. We really are supporting the liver in terms of the liver cells, but we're also doing a bit of the liver's work for it with this ellagic acid by providing this alternative way to conjugate. And then it has other things, and it's got the catechins that we get from decaffeinated green tea. Not only are those amazing detoxifiers, but they also protect us from the consequences of liver toxicity or just bad decisions that we've made over a long period of time. One of the biggest areas of research with green tea is in the cancer space. So, and we know that most toxins are by some form carcinogenic, because toxins actually disrupt our DNA and they cause genomic instability. So the catechins are really, really good. And then artichoke, which is another one of my favorites with chlorogenic acid. Chlorogenic acid supports especially that phase 2 liver detoxification. It's a really nice addition to speed up phase 2 so we don't get stuck with all these reactive intermediates. But what I do like about Advocare is that it contains a built-in multivitamin and mineral. So remember, in phase 1 we needed all our B vitamins, and so the Advocare will speak to that as well. It's going to have your complete B complex, but it's also going to have specific minerals, especially things like molybdenum, which is extremely important for hormone detoxification and for us to make something called glutathione in the body. It's got the amino acids, the sulfur-rich amino acids like N-acetylcysteine in. It's got some additional sodium sulfate. So sulfation is a very important detoxification process in the body. And then it's got a really nice amount of taurine to help that kidney in phase 3. So I call it my detox in a bottle. It's something that, it's easy enough to take one a day every day, one every second day, or you can actually maybe do 2 a day if you feel like you want to do a slightly more intense detoxification. The only caveat would be if you're going to increase the dosing of Advocare, is I would suggest that you see a practitioner, especially if you're on medication, because it can affect your medication. But this is a nice product for me, and it's a very easy product to work with, and no horrible taste, no green sludge that you have to drink in the morning. It's very easy to take, and it's going to give you energy as well because of the B complex. So I really like this formula.
It really is one of my go-tos and has been for a long time, especially since genetically I have very sluggish detoxification. So when I realized that, it suddenly made sense that why I feel so awful when I have alcohol. But for me, I do take it most days. But if I have a glass of wine, or if I have any alcohol, I definitely step up my dosage, and it's been a phenomenal product over the years. So some people will suddenly recognize or understand that there are times when they really don't feel well, especially perhaps after something like anesthetic, or when you've had to be on a medication for some time. Then you can also just say, okay, I'm going to do a course of the Advocare just to assist my body in clearing up any residual toxins that might have accumulated.
And also, I would like to add to that if they're on a multivitamin, they can maybe alternate, because there's already provides that built-in multi. So they must consider Advocare to include their multivitamin, as it were, all their minerals as well, but it's got the added detoxification herbs and amino acids. And so from a cost perspective, affordability perspective, if you're on a multivitamin but you really want to do a detox, you could alternate. So you could take your Advocare one day and your multivitamin the other day, or you can just do the course of Advocare and then go back onto your multi. but it's a very easy, it's an easy product to work. And you know, the best time is around the festive season time. You know, we've just come from that now, but if you just take Advocare and ramp it up a little bit towards the end of the year, or if you know that you're going somewhere, you're going to a function, there's going to be a little bit more alcohol, or there's going to be things that you don't normally consume, just around those times, it's easy enough just to up the dose maybe to 2 a day for, you know, a few days around the event, and then step it down again. So it lends itself to anybody's lifestyle, and they can pretty much do a nice detox just by using the Advocare.
Absolutely. So I wanted to mention, just if you would like to get a copy of the detoxification questionnaire to complete, you can send an email, and I'll put it in the comments as well, and we'll save this recording and put it on YouTube. But you can email me at health@emmamentel.com. It's Emma and it's Mentel, MENTEL.com. And you can just put the subject as detox and ask for the detox questionnaire. And if you would like to order yourself an Advocare, or if you're considering getting some detox support and you want more advice, you can ask me on email, or you can use my Metagenics online store. I did leave the address in the comments as well. So it's emhealth.metagenics. No, what did I say? Sorry, I think I've just got confused because it's such a different one. emhealth.metagenics.co.za. So that's my Metagenics online store. There are the medical foods which come in a tub, like UltraClear Plus or UltraClear Renew as well, or UltraClear Plus pH, and those are powders that you can use as a meal if you want to support the detoxification even further. But let's make it quite specific depending on your particular needs, and you can always ask about that in your email. Natasha, what else?
Emma, I think that brings us to the end of our chat. But the main takeaway for me is detox doesn't have to be this big daunting process. It begins with mindfulness. Just start reading labels and be more mindful about what we're eating. But if you want to do gentle daily detox, something as simple as Advocare, you know, it doesn't have to be a massive undertaking. Just start simple and see how you feel on something like Advocare. And if you are going to be doing guided detoxes twice a year with a practitioner, try and maintain as much as you can away from that, because it's pointless doing the detox and going straight back into what you used to do before. And be mindful that all of us need to detox. It's not really a question of, are we toxic? It's more a question of how toxic we are. So this should be part of anybody that's health conscious, and anybody that cares about their family should be thinking along the lines of detoxification, because the whole family can do a detox. I mean, the kids, from the minute they can have sippy cups, can possibly do one of the medical foods like UltraClear Plus, just to support gentle daily detox. And the nice thing is that the UltraClear Plus has a little bit of carbohydrate and protein, so it will take care of the energy demands of little kiddies that are growing. But that's it from my side, Emma. I hope we've demystified detoxification a bit.
Yeah, I think it's lovely to know the technical information so that it gives us a better understanding of what it's all about. And if nothing else, perhaps just becoming more aware of your exposure. If over time, so if in the next year, you can start reducing your exposure by looking at replacing your personal care products, looking at replacing your shampoo, your household detergents, from your washing powder to your dishwashing liquid to what you clean your floors with. Remember, every time you dry yourself with a towel or sleep in a bed where the sheets have been washed in a chemical detergent or with softener, or the clothes. So I always think of those things seem like small things, but over time they start to build up. If you're not feeling well, if you feel like you can feel a whole lot better. Start taking these small things into consideration, and then over time start to replace them, start to support your liver, your kidneys, your digestive tract in supporting the detoxification process. And I always add, think about your toxic thoughts and emotions, because those will also contribute to your toxic load. See if you could perhaps find a way to make joy an essential nutrient every day. So if you're living very much in a fear-based state, or a lot of anger, in Chinese medicine, we know that anger will be stored in the liver. It might be time to just do some forgiveness, some release, some letting go, so that you can assist that process as well. And then I just wanted to add, washing fruit and veg, it's sometimes not enough to just wash with water, because a lot of the sprays that I use are in a fat base, so an oily substance that will cover the skin of the apple, for example. So you might want to use something like white vinegar, usually a third cup in a bowl or in a basin, and just to rinse your fruit and veggies in there should help to dissolve that film. There are also fruit and veg washes available, but I think white vinegar is such a simple one to use. I also just like to mention to clients things like your exposure to radiation, your Wi-Fi, your phones, your computers. So at night, perhaps switch your Wi-Fi off. That's just another angle of toxicity that gets added. But the list goes on. Don't feel overwhelmed. Just start to become mindful. And then I'd like to thank for those of you who are on the recording, and then for those of you who will be watching the recording. And thank you, Natasha, for your time and always your valuable technical information and knowledge.
Thank you, Em. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to ask you perhaps just to end the recording.